In the morning of Saturday, April 15th of 2017, Cisco Garcia and his longtime friend Guillaume Macaro loaded up their truck with a bunch of oxygen tanks and drove to the mouth of Cova de sa Piqueta, a sprawling cave system located in the island of Majorca, Spain. It's one of Spain's Balearic Islands and absolutely breathtaking. But you know what is even more beautiful? It's what's underneath the island, the underwater environment and its long cave system. Piqueta spreads out its tunnel for a whole kilometer with many chambers along the way. But what's scary about this cave system is its complexity. It has so many little and large tunnels leading into various chambers. In other words, it's a maze, and you're more likely to get lost in it than actually succeed getting out. It could be that mind-boggling. But despite the dangers, Cisco and Guillaume were there to spend the whole day exploring this maze of a dangerous and dark tunnel system. Thus, they unloaded all the diving equipment from the vehicle in hopes of getting ready to dive in. Both of these men were highly experienced technical divers. Cisco always had a passion for exploring caves ever since he was a little boy. With a team of friends, Cisco used to go on his own little expeditions searching labyrinths. His childhood village was dotted with caves which kid Cisco could easily explore on foot. So as he grew old, he already knew what he wanted to be, a cave diver. So he started his training in underwater diving and eventually became not only a pro diver but also a geology teacher and a trained speleologist that explores, researches and maps the underwater cave systems of Majorca. As of the time of this particular dive, Cisco had experience in cave diving for over 20 years. He always considered it a hobby. At the time, he was 54 years old and a father to 2 kids, but he was unfortunately divorced with his wife. So as a habit, Cisco spent all his weekends mapping the island's underwater caves in hopes of discovering and exploring new tunnels or chambers. Similarly, Guillaume was also a 54-year-old diver that had been exploring underwater caves for about 14 years, but he was more experienced in ocean diving as he had done it for decades. He was just happy to be able to dive with his buddy Cisco and also map a new chamber. So as you can imagine, these guys must have been super adept divers with such backgrounds. Alright, back to the present, which is that fateful Saturday morning. Now, the duo is at the entrance of the Piqueta cave. After unloading the air cylinders and other equipment from the truck, they started preparing. Cisco unrolled a map and pointed his finger towards the section of the cave that is located about 900 meters away from the entrance. He said we'll get to see and map the underwater chambers that have never been reached or studied by humans. The man was overjoyed with excitement knowing he'll get to see this untouched area. They considered this just a routine expedition and were confident that it's going to be a successful journey. So, Cisco attached 4 air cylinders to his belt while Guillaume only got 3. In them, there was enough air for the two to dive in, explore and return back to the surface while also reserving some for an additional hour in case something goes wrong. So, after putting on the diving suits and other gear, the two slipped into water. Cisco was the first one to lower himself underwater while Guillaume followed behind him. Right away, they were greeted with pitch black darkness. Without a light, they would not have been able to see anything. But the duo were fully prepared to face these harsh conditions. Now, they are about to dive for 900 meters continuously in order to get to their location. The full distance between the two ends of the cave is also only 1000 meters. So basically, their finish point is the other end of the cave. Also, the depth of the dive will vary between 25 and 44 meters depending on the section of the cave. Yeah, that might not sound like an extreme depth, but the insanely complex maze-like tunnel system can make up for it. Cisco and Guillaume will have quite the difficult time making their way through these passages. However, they were solely trained to dive through caves like this. So in order to move through the tunnels and find their way back out of the maze without getting lost, they used a simple and classic tool, a guideline, a thin nylon rope flagged with numbered labels. You see, as the two dive deeper, the line also extends with them, and even when a tunnel forked, another line is extended down the next passage. So since the starting point, the two have been placing lines, markers and arrows at each intersection as their path splits into more passages every dozen meters, creating the so-called maze. Thus, No matter how dark or complex the cave system gets, the guideline can direct them through their course without necessarily needing good visibility. Now it has been some time. They have not encountered any hazards at all. The water was clear this day, and therefore the markers were pretty visible. As all these were good signs, the two friends kept navigating the twisting and narrow tunnels, leaving a bit of stirred-up sediment in the wake. About an hour went by. They reached their destination, the other end of the cave. There, Cisco saw this one particular chamber with little rocks. He swam into it and began collecting them as samples for his research. Meanwhile, Guillaume saw a different chamber and swam into it. He started measuring its shape and diameter. This went on for another hour or so. Cisco checked his air pressure gauges and realized 1/3 of the air has been spent, which means they each have sufficient air for 2 more hours. At the most, probably 2.5 hours. By this time, both were done with their respective tasks. Cisco thought it's time to go back. So he carefully swam out of his chamber and moved towards Guillaume's chamber. Right as he turned to enter it, Guillaume also came out of it by chance. It was a junction between the chambers, so both didn't see the other and ended up bumping into each other. Their collision stirred up silt from the ground, making it almost impossible to see. In the midst of all this, Cisco grabbed Guillaume by his shoulders and showed his air pressure dials. Both knew it's about time they get the hell out. So they started back through the same route they came with the help of the line to guide them towards the right passages and direction. The sediment rest on the journey in, plus what just happened at the junction, have made it impossible for the duo to ascend without the guideline. A few minutes went by and the passage the two men are diving through was still quite wide, but that didn't last for too long. After a couple more dozens of meters, the walls closed into a point where Cisco's air cylinders were dragging against the rocks and stones. Trying to fit in such narrow passages stirred up silt even more. Once crystal clear water now looks like a chunky chocolatey soap. It was that bad, but it is nothing compared to what happens to them next. As I said, they were following the guideline this whole time. But that's only until they reached a rock wall where the guideline all of a sudden ends. So the line is no more. As they could not see anything, Cisco tried to touch and feel the rest of the line, but there was nothing. It has either been broken or slipped. They guessed maybe some rocks had fallen on it. Even so, Cisco and Guillaume tried to look for the line as it was their only option to get out of the cave. They spent some time trying to find it only by touch but failed miserably. Time is way too precious in this situation as they don't have much air left in the tanks, but what to do? They don't know which direction or passage they should swim towards. They are in grave danger. Both have violated the rule of thirds, which is about how you use your air underwater. You see, 1/3 of your air is for the way in, another third for your way out, and another for emergencies. But these two friends already have used up their air to dive in and out of the cave. What is left is that last amount of emergency gas they never even intended to use in the first place. Well, they didn't think they will have to. However, lucky for them, Cisco remembered other divers mentioning about an air pocket in a chamber nearby, about 200 meters away from their current location to be specific. Although this chamber has never been explored by anyone, some still believed it to exist and have breathable air. But, well, it was blind luck anyway that Cisco even had heard of it and let alone remember it in such a panicky condition. Nonetheless, he instinctively grabbed Guillaume and indicated to get to that air pocket while he will spend a bit longer trying to find the guideline. Guillaume hesitantly nodded and agreed as they had no other option but to save as much air as possible. Getting to this air pocket means being able to breathe its air instead of what's left in the tanks. So now, Guillaume is on the way to this unknown chamber. One could ask, if they can't see anything in the water, how could they find this chamber and its air pocket? Well, the two had some recollections of where they were, and also remember, these guys map hazardous underwater caves for a living. So certainly, they were skillful enough to find a chamber, and just like that, Guillaume did find it. Meanwhile, Cisco kept looking for the line. He took off his gloves and began waving his hands vigorously in hopes of feeling for the line in the dark abyss. While doing that, he swam back and forth around the area the guideline is bound to be, but all he felt was rocks and muddy sediment. The visibility got worse by the second. After some time, Cisco checked his air gauge and was shocked. He has lost track of time and only got about an hour of gas left in the tanks. It was the same with Guillaume. He also had a little over an hour of gas left. So far, they have wasted about an hour trying to find the line, and they have a whole kilometer to dive in order to reach the entrance. Cisco thought, at this point, they will not make it. Well, he isn't wrong. Let's say even if they did somehow find the guideline or the right path to the ascent, he and Guillaume will run out of air long before they get to the surface. Crushed with absolute despair, Cisco began swimming to the chamber where Guillaume is in, waiting. There, you could at least figure something out without spending any more air in the water. When Cisco got inside the chamber and looked toward the air pocket, it looked decently large from the underwater perspective. Guillaume was also right there, waiting with his head above the water. Now we can only imagine how relieved he must have felt seeing his friend. Eventually, Cisco also brought his head out of the water, and to his surprise, he saw a huge room extending probably about 100 meters to one side and 200 to 30 meters to another. There were variously shaped rocks reaching high above the water level. Next, the two clambered out of the water fully and onto the rocks because they were at a risk of hypothermia due to the coldness of the water. It's a condition that occurs when your body loses heat faster than it can produce it, causing a dangerously low body temperature. So, they avoided the risk of it and now in this creepy and spacious air chamber. Simply to put it, it was a big dark room with a large lake in the middle of it. Not to mention its beauty though, it was something else. Not the kind we see on the surface. The men took off some of their diving gear and took a deep breath. Then only they realized the air feels different. It contained more carbon dioxide than regular air, probably 4 to 5%. That is much higher than the air back on the surface, which averages only about 0.03%. They knew this high concentration of carbon dioxide could be problematic, in fact, quite fatal. Unconsciousness, rapid breathing, hallucinations, memory loss, confusion, headaches, ringing in the ears, paralysis, and even death. These are the effects of this condition, which is known as carbon dioxide poisoning. So, spending too long in this chamber was never a good idea. They spent some time going over their options. Though keep in mind, if they were to ever break down and make a terrible and irrational decision, this would have been the time, but no. Both remained calm and kept a clear head. Shortly thereafter, Cisco noticed another alternative route from this chamber to the surface and pointed it out to Guillaume on their laminated map. This particular route has already been mapped, but according to the map, it is a much longer and riskier route. On the flip side, its guideline should be intact though. To make things worse, the silt in the water has been kicked up significantly more at this point due to their frantic search for the line earlier. Cisco thought it was like trying to drive a car in a very foggy night, but upon examining their air tanks, they came to an agonizing realization. The remaining air was only enough for one person to make it out of the cave. With no hesitations, Cisco said to Guillaume, "Listen, you are thinner and quicker, and therefore would need less air for breathing. Unlike me, you actually have a chance at succeeding." Cisco is being impressively logical here. You see, he had spent many years exploring underground chambers and breathing their cave air, which has higher carbon dioxide levels. So he knows exactly how to control his breath to minimize the damage of toxic gases. Guillaume was outright reluctant to leave Cisco on his own at first, but as he listened to Cisco's logical explanation, he knew it was their only chance, leaving Cisco behind and alerting the authorities to send help as quickly as possible. Otherwise, they both would die down in this air pocket and no one would even notice for days. Even if someone did, this air pocket would not be the first place anybody comes to search. By then, it'll be too late. So as this was literally the best course of action, Guillaume suited up and attached the remaining air cylinders to his belt and slipped back into water. The two friends said goodbye to each other one last time. Then Cisco watched his friend disappear into the dark abyss and thought to himself, I hope I'll see him again. And with that, the darkest time of Cisco's life began. Now his biggest challenge was staying sane while also inhaling mostly unbreathable cave air. But not even a minute passed, Cisco felt a sign of carbon dioxide poisoning, rapid shallow breathing. It got difficult for him to breathe to his full lung capacity. You see, the more carbon dioxide someone inhales, the less their body will be able to absorb oxygen. So you know the rest. With such oxygen deprivation, Cisco's death would be imminent. By this point, it was 6 p.m. Saturday evening. He took off all his gear and more thoroughly explored the chamber. Specifically, the room was about 80 meters long and 20 meters wide with a gap of 12 meters between the water level and ceiling. If you ask me, that is too much room and darkness for just one person. Even so, Cisco was strong. He figured the water at the surface level of the lake was drinkable. Then he also found a more flattened rock where he can rest and lay down better. He decided not to use his light anymore. 2 of the 3 torches he brought were fully drained of their batteries and the third one barely had any power at all. So he only turned it on when he wants to pee or climbs down from the rocks to get fresh water. Theoretically, the resources like air, despite it being a bit toxic, and fresh water will help Cisco stay alive for quite a long time and still have more air to breathe until he is rescued. But now his chances of survival solely depends on his friend, Guillaume, and whether he will make it out alive and alert the authorities. That is something that's out of Cisco's control. He can do nothing but wait in complete and lonely darkness. That sounds terrifying. Cisco asked himself, why did this happen to me now after so many years of diving? Every minute in the cave felt like an hour to Cisco. It was unbearable. But less than an hour later, Guillaume burst through the water's surface and emerged from the entrance. He tore his regulator from his mouth and gratefully took a breath full of clean Mallorcan air. He was shaking from the terrors he just experienced, but didn't waste a second. He right away dialed up and alerted Group Nord, Mallorca's official caving organization. Within an hour, several of the island's top cave divers were called in and assembled to launch a full-scale rescue operation. One of these pro-rescue divers was Bernard Clammer, who was almost as much experienced as Cisco himself. Bernard already knew that the cave Cisco is trapped in is filled with full of toxic gases, mostly carbon dioxide, and he's running out of time as they speak. So as quickly as possible, the team got ready, got Guillaume to mark Cisco's location on a laminated map, and with it, the men head underground. 2 divers who were familiar with the cave system first jumped in before others, but about 2 hours later came back with bad news. In rush to get to the surface, Guillaume had stared up the water to a point where the visibility is just 0. Nobody could see a thing, let alone the markers showing the direction when a tunnel forked. Bernard said they will have to wait. The water must be clear before diving again, and that might take some time. Could be hours or even days for such muddy and dust-like sediment to settle. Yeah, it was true that Cisco could choke to death breathing excessive carbon dioxide, but Bernard said they got no choice. Swimming in water like chocolate could only lead to more fatalities, and ultimately, they will have no chance of saving Cisco or even themselves. So, they had to wait. Back down in the cave, Cisco felt like he has spent days. At the 5-hour mark, his diving watch stopped working, so he was clueless as to how long he has spent in the chamber so far. Thus, even just a few hours felt significantly longer. During the first few hours, he was hopeful and thought Guillaume will make it out and send help, but as minutes turned into hours, he started to lose hope. He thought Guillaume might have gotten lost and by now is dead. So in his mind, he lost his friend and is all alone down there just waiting to die a slow death. Though he was guilty in a way. After all, he's the one that sent Guillaume to his death, hoping he will make it out. Although Cisco was already assuming Guillaume's death, there was still a chance that he might have made it out, and he deep down knew that, but there was no way to know. Imagine the suspense he must be feeling. You gotta be superhumanly resilient to cope with such negative thoughts and emotions. Once about 8 hours passed, Cisco started thinking about his kids, his daughter of 9 and son of 15. The thought of them being too young to lose their father and what would happen to them when he's no longer around was too much to handle. He got terrified of death. His thoughts went to his mother and sister-in-law as well, and later wondered where his ex-wife might be at this moment. It had only been an year since they had split, and he was devastated by it. Nonetheless, on the flip side, these thoughts gave him some strength to not give up just yet. He reasoned that there might still be a possibility of someone coming to his aid. Well, at least he hoped so. By this point, the man was starving and got very little energy. To make matters worse, he started experiencing almost all the effects of carbon dioxide poisoning. It started with a severe headache and dizziness. Although he was exhausted due to lack of enough oxygen in his system, it was impossible for him to fall asleep. His mind started playing tricks on him. He was hallucinating bright lights when there was nothing but just darkness in the cave. Not just that, he also heard bubbles. You know that sound when divers blow bubbles in the water? He was hearing them. They got louder and louder by the second, as if a rescue diver was reaching the chamber. He thought, okay, this is it. Someone finally has come to save me. But sadly, when he turned his head, there was nothing. Everything stopped. No one brought their head out of the lake or anywhere else. The lights and the bubbles, they were just a hallucination. So now, he doesn't know what is real and what is not. His brain was worrying. Just breathing alone is taking a great mental and physical toll. But at all cost, he kept his breathing under control. However, every once in a while, he would get up, turn the lights on, and make his way down to the lake from the rocks to drink some water. Though that worsened his health state, because the more energy he spends moving, the more air he inhales. After a while, he started feeling a sharp pain in his temple, a sign his suffering is only getting worse. He realized he must stay lying down and not move much, so from this point onwards, he only moved to pee or drink water. Since the 8-hour mark passed, how long has it been? Hours? No, probably days. But the man had no idea and thought it must have been at least 5 days. He felt almost unconscious, but fought well and never lost control over his breathing. It was the one thing he made sure to do continuously. But still, there was no sign of rescue. At this point, he's feeling beyond hopeless. The fear and distress was unbearable. He knew he was not going to make it. It was certain to him. He thought when the rescue divers finally find him, or rather his dead body, there would be no way they will get it out of here. He knew the narrow and insane tunnel system would not allow it. He thought, wow, I'm literally buried alive here. Now remember, I said he doesn't know the time and is assuming that it has probably been days since the time he got trapped. Well, he isn't wrong. It really has been over 24 hours, though not 5 days like he thought. Now the man was worn out, and out of nowhere, he started hearing something. At first he was like, nah, it's all in my head. This cannot be real. Oh, is it? This time, something feels different. It was the sound of tanks being filled with air. He thought, oh, that must be for my rescue team. Now, we don't know why he hears noises that are so specific like this, but then he thought, no, this might be the sound of people trying to drill a rock, and maybe they're actually creating a path straight towards this chamber. He was overjoyed as he realized he's not really going to die. But suddenly, the noises stopped. It sounded too real to end like that, having his hopes up just to realize that it was all an illusion. So with that, Cisco faced his darkest moment. He thought to himself, I'm about to die in the ways divers fear the most, without food or air, trapped in the darkness. His light's battery was almost spent, and he knew he wouldn't be able to climb down to drink water in the dark. So his fate was sealed, and he was certain of it. Back on the surface, medics, divers and cavers from across the island stood by the entrance, debating the best course of action. This is after those two divers found the problem with the bad visibility in the water. Bernard said, "Calm down everyone. We've made one attempt and no one can get more than 300 meters in." He explained the hazardous condition. "The water is like mud. You can't dive and survive in this water. You need to understand that." And meanwhile, police were setting up barricades to keep the growing crowd of people and reporters at bay. It was getting out of hand, and the General Director of Emergencies for Balearic Islands was there and decided to make the call. It was night time, so he said, "We wait until morning before diving again, hoping the sediment will be settled by then." Everyone knew the gravity of the situation and how every minute they spent doing nothing, Cisco's body is reaching its limit, sucking down gulps of toxic air. By this point, it was 9:30 p.m. on Sunday, and Cisco had been trapped underground for over 30 hours. As the panic state settled at the mouth of the cave and the gathered crowd kinda scattered a little, one diver mumbled something under his breath furiously. "By tomorrow it will be too late," he said. Well, he might be right, but let's find out. Back in the chamber, Cisco waited and waited and waited. He knew he doesn't have a lot of time left now, dying of starvation and dehydration or oxygen deprivation. One of these things was going to be his end. So his mind was all over the place. He was feeling so many emotions. You see, when you know you are going to die soon, you react to such a fate in your own way. Earlier, he left his gear bag in one corner of the chamber, so he decided to leave the air pocket for a bit and swim across the chamber to get something from it. It was his knife. He wanted to have it as a last resort if he ever decided to end his life quick by his own hands with no further suffering. Sadly, he already had a feeling that soon he will need that knife. So all hopes were lost and he is mentally preparing for some sort of a death, whether by his own hands or something else. Some time went by and Cisco heard the sounds of bubbles again, like a diver surfacing. When a diver's light began dancing on the roof of the cave, it seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. He was like, even for a hallucination, this feels truly nice. The feeling of someone coming to rescue me, to him it was not the most familiar feeling in this situation. "Cisco, Cisco," someone yelled with a familiar voice. Wait, am I that close to death that I'm hearing people's voices? Then, not even a second passed, he saw a helmet emerging from the lake. It was an old friend. So after all, this whole thing might not be just his imagination. Back on the ground, since the General Director gave the command to wait till morning, it had been a long and difficult night for everyone, knowing Cisco might already be dead and that they have done nothing so far. Of course, they had no choice but to wait, but one way or another, time went by. So eventually, the time to begin the rescue operation began. It was several minutes past noon on Monday when the call came. Juan Freddy Fernandez, a dear friend of Cisco, had been waiting for over a day for his turn to join the search. Thus, before others, he jumped in. As he was swimming down the very first tunnel itself, he was delighted to see clear water. Not crystal clear, but surely enough to see the markers. So with the good start, he focused on his task, which is to cut all the guidelines except the ones leading to Cisco. After about 2 hours, Freddy successfully got done cutting the lines and came out of the cave beaming. There he said to the gathered team of divers, "I was almost there, man." Right at his chamber. You see, everybody had specific tasks, and Freddy completed his one, so that others can easily and quickly get to Cisco. And with that being done, Bernard, who is the other friend of Cisco, got his tanks and diving gear to suit up. Within minutes, he was diving in the water. Now that Freddy had cut other guidelines, with just a single white line to follow, Bernard was able to find his way through the underground maze straight to Cisco's chamber. He has been diving for about an hour and therefore knew he must be close by now. And just as he thought, he finally found the chamber. Now, his priority was to figure whether Cisco was alive. Then, depending on the answer and Cisco's health condition, he had to decide what kind of a rescue mission it should be. So for that, he first swam towards the entrance to the chamber. Now back in the chamber, Cisco is spending his 50-something hour, and he doesn't even know it. However, remember I said he saw a helmet emerging from the lake? Well, it was Bernard's, which means just as he planned, he has dived and got inside the chamber. Cisco was dumbfounded as Bernard clambered out of the water and climbed up the rocks. Bernard was dripping wet as he was striding. This was literally a miracle to Cisco. After seeing so many hallucinations of being saved, this one was real. Out of pure joy, he embraced Bernard. Can you imagine feeling so helpless to a point where you consider taking your own life to end the suffering, and then out of nowhere, someone comes and saves you? It was as simple as that. Cisco must have felt overwhelmed with happiness. He asked, "Guillaume is dead, isn't he?" Bernard said, "No, he's alive and well, waiting for you at the cave entrance." Cisco was so relieved to hear that. This was a lot for him to process. He was drained of energy and almost couldn't stand or function well. I mean, it is already amazing that he was not unconscious after breathing in so much carbon dioxide. Bernard gave him some glucose to boost up his energy and then talked for a while until he was sure that Cisco is in an okay shape to make the return trip to the surface. By the way, remember him hearing a lot of noises and some actually sounded like people drilling a rock? Well, it was real. When the rescue team's first attempt to get to Cisco failed due to bad visibility in the water, they had tried to drill a hole into the cave wall and hand Cisco oxygen and food but failed to reach the chamber. Which means not everything Cisco saw and heard was all in his mind. Some were real. So after some chit-chat, Bernard knew it was time for him to dive back. He asked Cisco to hold on for a little longer and said, "I will go back out to let everyone know that you are alive, so that the next team of divers can bring you air and supplies to get you out of here safely." After explaining that, Bernard asked Cisco, "Can you wait a little longer? And if so, are you sure about that?" Because he didn't know how being trapped in the darkness has really affected Cisco's mind. So far, the man has spent about 53 hours all alone breathing toxic gases. But it seemed that he was mentally fine at this point. He said, "Now that I know I'm saved, I could wait even another day." And that was enough for Bernard to go ahead with the rest of the plan. At about 8 p.m. on Monday, Hillary and Enrique, both friends of Cisco, got to swim underwater and emerged from the water in Cisco's chamber. They arrived there carrying cylinders heavy with nitrox, a gas that contains twice the oxygen of regular air, since that's what Cisco's body was lacking the most. As Cisco was inhaling this potent mixture, he felt his body coming back to life. The whirring in his head got quieter and quieter. And in less than a few minutes, his head felt clearer than ever. He took a deep breath for the first time in 58 hours. Yeah, that means he had not inhaled air to his full lung capacity. In other words, he hasn't taken a deep breath in 58 hours. Have you ever experienced shortness of breath? Well, I'm sure some of you have. It's a truly terrifying feeling. The more you try to breathe, the shorter your breath becomes. And then you will panic like you are literally about to die. And Cisco handled breathing like that for so damn long. It's incredible. Cisco smiled at his old friends and said, "I'm ready to go." So, after being trapped for almost 3 days, 60 hours to be precise, at 11:10 p.m. on Monday, Cisco successfully made his return trip to the surface with his two friends. It felt unreal to him. He never thought he would see the outside world again. But there he was coming out of the mouth of Cova de sa Piqueta. There was a huge crowd of people waiting there, cheering and greeting him. Among the crowd, news reporters, police officers, and every other person were overjoyed to see him. Cisco's buddy Guillaume was one of them, breaking a grin with a relieved expression on his face when he saw Cisco. He must have felt the most mental strain. After all, Cisco, without even thinking about his own life, convinced Guillaume to take the remaining tanks and get the hell out. So it was a sad and wholesome reunion. though they didn't have much time to talk as the medics put Cisco in an ambulance and took off. By this time, Cisco's body temperature was 32 degrees Celsius or 89.6 degrees Fahrenheit. He was close to developing hypothermia, but luckily treated right away and given pure oxygen to breathe overnight. Gradually, he had a good recovery. He had surprisingly remained calm the whole time, considering how he almost died. But at one point, he gave in to his feelings and burst into tears after seeing the TV coverage of his experience and rescue the next day. When some time passed, Cisco and Guillaume were fully recovered physically and mentally. They were asked to name the chamber they explored in their dreadful journey. It was a tradition with Group Nord, the caving organization in the island, to let the divers who first explore a new cave name it. So the chamber that Cisco and Guillaume discovered and sought refuge is known as the Room of the Three Miracles. That's the name Cisco gave it. In the Three Miracles, the first one is the two friends finding a chamber with air. The second one is Cisco breathing its toxic air for almost 3 days and surviving. The last and third one is him being able to escape the terrifying ordeal and seeing the outside world. Amazingly, after about a month, Cisco returned to Piqueta Caves again and decided to continue his hobby. Of course, this was a shock to everyone, but it seemed that he didn't want to forget the one thing that he loves doing the most since his childhood. Later he said, "My children don't like it much, but they don't tell me not to do it. I have spent 24 years exploring underground. It's in my blood." Well, that's his choice and his loved ones respected it. And with that, we've come to the end of the story. But I must say, unlike most other cave diving stories, this surprisingly ended on a happy note. Nobody died. For such an intense story, it had a good ending. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. Alright then, I will see you in my next video of Night Dangers. And until then, stay safe out there and goodbye.